My name is Ava Bennett. I'm 32 years old. And the morning my husband Ethan Carter sent me divorce papers, he genuinely believed he was about to destroy my life. The papers arrived on a Monday morning while I was making coffee, at exactly 7:15 a.m. A process server knocked on my front door and handed me a thick envelope. I remember standing there barefoot, confused, still half asleep. Ethan had already moved out 3 days earlier, after claiming he needed space to think. Apparently, he had used that space to prepare for war. Attached to the divorce filing was a yellow sticky note, written in his familiar handwriting. "I'm taking everything. My lawyer says you can't stop me. Maybe you should have treated me better." I stared at those words for a long moment. 5 years of marriage, reduced to a taunt. No sadness, no explanation, just arrogance. I took a sip of coffee, picked up my phone, and texted him one word: received. Then, I sat down and started reading. According to the filing, Ethan was claiming that I had financially controlled him throughout our marriage. He alleged emotional manipulation, economic abuse, and unfair financial dominance. Reading it felt surreal. Ethan had worked in real estate. He earned good money. The problem wasn't income. The problem was spending: luxury watches, weekend trips, designer clothing, a home gym that gathered dust after 2 weeks. Yet somehow the paperwork painted him as a helpless victim. The accusations themselves didn't surprise me. What caught my attention was the asset disclosure section. He had listed nearly everything: the house, my retirement accounts, investment portfolios, my car, even my expensive photography equipment. Very thorough. Almost impressively thorough. Except for one detail. He had omitted something important: my cryptocurrency portfolio. I wasn't one of those people who constantly talked about crypto. I had quietly invested since 2017. Bitcoin, Ethereum, a few other projects. Nothing flashy. Nothing secret. Just consistent investing. Ethan knew I owned some, but he thought it was insignificant. He used to call it internet monopoly money whenever the topic came up. As of that Monday morning, my holdings were worth approximately $347,000. I finished my coffee, walked into my office, opened my hardware wallet, and started transferring everything into secure cold storage, not hiding assets, not moving ownership, just securing them, a distinction my attorney would later appreciate. After that, I made a phone call. My friend Rachel worked in digital forensics. A year earlier, she had jokingly told me that if anyone ever tried to cheat me financially, she wanted front row seats. Now she was getting her wish. "Rachel, remember when you said you'd help if I ever needed forensic work?" She laughed. "What happened?" "My husband filed for divorce." The laughter stopped immediately. "How bad?" "I think he's hiding something." A brief silence followed. Then she said, "How thorough do you want this investigation?" "The kind that keeps people awake at night." By the next afternoon, I had hired an attorney named Margaret Lawson. Margaret had spent decades handling high-conflict divorces. Unlike Ethan's lawyer, whose advertisements seemed to appear on every bus stop in the city, Margaret relied entirely on reputation. When she reviewed the filing, she leaned back in her chair. "Your husband seems very confident." "He is. People are usually most dangerous when they're confident and wrong." That sentence stayed with me. Update 1. Ethan had become very active online. His relationship status changed overnight. He started posting motivational quotes about freedom, self-worth, and escaping toxic situations. Friends filled the comments with encouragement. "You deserve better. Proud of you. New chapter." I watched quietly. The performance was impressive. A few days later, his lawyer sent a formal demand, requesting immediate disclosure of all financial assets, including cryptocurrency, digital investments, and online holdings. Interesting. Apparently they knew about the crypto after all. Margaret advised complete transparency, so we disclosed everything. Every account, every investment, every asset, including the crypto wallet, current value, and complete records. Meanwhile, Rachel was digging, and she was finding things. A lot of things. When she called me late one evening, I could hear excitement in her voice. Ava, your husband's been busy. How busy? You want the weird news or the bad news? Weird first. He has multiple payment accounts he never disclosed, several transfer platforms, and a bank account that's only in his name. I sat up straighter. When was it opened? About 8 months ago. 8 months. 3 months before he moved out. 3 months before he filed. 3 months before he started acting distant. Suddenly, pieces began falling into place. How much is in it? About $67,000. I closed my eyes. Not because of the money, because of the timeline. He hadn't decided to leave recently. He had been planning this. Carefully. Methodically. For months. Rachel wasn't finished. It gets worse. I felt my stomach tighten. Tell me. There are indications he was receiving off-the-books cash commissions from several property transactions. The room became very quiet. Can you prove it? I'm documenting everything. I stared out the window into the darkness. For the first time, I wasn't grieving my marriage. I was questioning whether I had ever truly known the man I married. And deep down, a terrible realization began forming. The divorce papers weren't the beginning of Ethan's betrayal. They were simply the first time he got caught. The week after Rachel discovered the hidden account, everything escalated. Looking back, I think Ethan realized I wasn't reacting the way he expected. He expected panic, begging, anger. Instead, I was documenting everything. That seemed to frustrate him more than any argument ever could. The first sign came when he filed an emergency motion attempting to freeze several marital assets. His lawyer claimed I was moving money and concealing resources. Margaret wasn't impressed. Neither was the judge. The court reviewed the filings, examined the evidence, and quickly determined that I hadn't spent or hidden anything. My cryptocurrency remained fully documented. The motion was denied. Ethan did not take that well. A few days later, I came home and immediately knew something was wrong. The office felt empty. My photography workstation was gone. The desk, the monitors, the editing computer, thousands of dollars worth of equipment had simply disappeared. I checked every room. Nothing. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Securing marital property. My lawyer advised it. I stared at the message. Then I typed a single response. K. Margaret laughed when I forwarded it. That's all you sent. That's all he deserved. Most of the equipment had been purchased years before our marriage. The receipts proved it. After a conversation involving attorneys and local authorities, Ethan reluctantly returned everything. Well, almost everything. One expensive camera lens was missing. A lens worth nearly $1,200. I didn't argue. I simply documented it. That became a recurring theme. Ethan created problems. I collected evidence. Meanwhile, Rachel continued her investigation. One afternoon, she called, sounding almost stunned. I found something interesting. What now? Do you remember helping Ethan invest a few years ago? I laughed bitterly. Unfortunately, I did. Back then, he had received a performance bonus and wanted advice. I helped him create a cryptocurrency account. I even showed him how to buy Ethereum. At the time, it had seemed like a supportive thing to do. Rachel continued. The account still exists. My stomach dropped. And it's worth over $30,000. I blinked. He disclosed it. No. A long silence followed. The significance hit both of us immediately. Ethan was accusing me of hiding assets while secretly failing to disclose assets of his own. Margaret's reaction was unforgettable. For the first time since I hired her, I saw genuine excitement. He hid cryptocurrency while demanding access to yours. That's bad. Ava. That's extremely bad. Things became even worse for him when Rachel completed the full forensic accounting report. 73 pages. Every page felt heavier than the last. The report documented undeclared income, questionable transactions, structured deposits, hidden accounts, missing disclosures, patterns extending back years. As painful as it was to read, Another emotion slowly replaced my sadness. Clarity. Because suddenly so many moments from our marriage made sense. The mysterious cash, the unexplained purchases, the defensive reactions whenever finances came up, the late-night banking activity, the passwords, the secrecy. For years I had convinced myself there were reasonable explanations. Now the explanations were sitting inside a 73-page report, and they were anything but reasonable. Margaret sent the report to Ethan's attorney, along with a very short note, "Please review and advise your client accordingly." 2 days later, his attorney withdrew from the case. Just like that. Gone. Official paperwork. No dramatic courtroom scene. No public statement. Just a quiet withdrawal. That evening, Ethan called me. Actually called. The moment I answered, he was screaming. "What did you do?" "Got an accountant." "You ruined everything." His voice cracked. For the first time, I heard fear. Real fear. "My lawyer says this could become criminal." I leaned against the kitchen counter. "What part?" "You know exactly what part." "No. Ethan. I really don't." His breathing became heavier. "This is financial abuse." I almost laughed. The irony was overwhelming. Financial abuse would be hiding money while accusing someone else of hiding money. Silence. Then the call disconnected. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Because Ethan made a mistake. A very large mistake. A few nights later, he went live on Instagram. Apparently after several glasses of wine. At first it was the usual performance. He spoke about surviving toxic relationships, about being targeted, about people trying to destroy successful men. Thousands of viewers had heard similar speeches before. Then he started talking too much. The alcohol loosened his judgment. He began ranting, complaining, defending himself against accusations nobody had publicly made. And then he crossed a line, several lines. Actually, he openly discussed financial issues, joked about tax strategies, complained that everyone bends the rules, suggested that hiding money wasn't a big deal. The live stream continued spiraling. One of my friends recorded the entire thing. Every minute, every statement, every admission. By the following morning, the video had spread among several people connected to the case. Margaret watched it twice. Then she simply smiled. I hope he enjoyed that wine. The damage didn't stop there. Federal authorities had already begun reviewing portions of the financial evidence. The live stream only added fuel. Soon after, Ethan hired a new lawyer. Young, inexperienced, clearly overwhelmed. His new attorney immediately filed aggressive motions, accusing me of obstructing access to marital cryptocurrency assets. Margaret practically predicted the outcome before the hearing even began. When we entered the courtroom, I noticed Ethan looked exhausted. Gone was the confidence from the divorce papers. Gone was the swagger from social media. Dark circles framed his eyes. His shoulders seemed lower, smaller. The judge reviewed the filings, then reviewed the evidence, then reviewed the undisclosed Ethereum account. Finally, she looked directly at Ethan. "Mr. Carter, you failed to disclose cryptocurrency holdings while simultaneously demanding complete access to your wife's holdings. Can you explain that?" His attorney attempted an explanation involving oversight, complex digital assets, misunderstandings, administrative confusion. The judge wasn't convinced. Neither was anyone else in the room. Then Margaret introduced another topic, tax obligation. The atmosphere changed instantly. The judge's expression hardened. Questions followed. Difficult questions. Questions Ethan clearly didn't want to answer. As the hearing ended, I noticed something for the first time. Fear. Not my fear. His. Outside the courthouse, Ethan confronted me before his lawyer could stop him. His eyes were burning with frustration. "You think you're clever." I remained calm. "I think I hired competent professionals." He stepped closer. "I know about Daniel." Daniel was a colleague from work. A good man. Professional. Kind. Nothing more. At least at the time. "What about Daniel?" "I've seen pictures." I frowned. "What pictures?" "You two having lunch." I stared at him. Lunch. Intimate lunches. The accusation sounded ridiculous. especially because the photos included several other coworkers sitting at the same table. For a moment, his confidence faltered. Then he doubled down. "I'm going to tell everyone who you really are." I looked directly at him. "No, Ethan. I think everyone is finally seeing who you really are." His lawyer quickly intervened and guided him away. As I watched them leave, a strange feeling settled over me. The man who had once promised to protect me was no longer fighting to win buy-in. He was fighting to survive. And the evidence was only getting started. By the time the final phase of the divorce arrived, Ethan's carefully crafted image had completely unraveled. The confident man who had attached that smug note to the divorce papers was gone. In his place stood someone desperately trying to outrun the consequences of his own choices. The financial investigation continued expanding. What initially appeared to be a few hidden accounts turned into a much larger problem. Authorities began examining years of transactions. Questions multiplied. Explanations became harder to give. And every answer seemed to create 3 new questions. Meanwhile, Ethan's parents got involved. His father, Richard, called me first, then his mother, Jenna, then both of them together. The conversations followed the same pattern. They wanted me to help him. They wanted me to make things easier. They wanted me to somehow stop the avalanche that was falling on their son. "Ava, he's learned his lesson," Jenna pleaded. "Has he? Can't you just let this go?" I sat quietly for a moment, then answered honestly. "I didn't create this situation. But you reported it. Once financial misconduct is discovered during litigation, there are legal obligations." Richard sighed heavily. "Family doesn't do this to family." That statement almost made me laugh. Family. The word sounded strange coming from people whose son had spent months secretly planning my destruction. "We're getting divorced," I said calmly. "We're literally becoming not family." The calls eventually stopped, not because they understood, because there was nothing left to argue. Facts are difficult to negotiate with. As pressure mounted, Ethan tried one final strategy. The worst one. He accused me of abuse. Not physical abuse. Not any specific incident. Just vague allegations of emotional manipulation and psychological control throughout our marriage. When Margaret informed me, I felt physically sick. Not because I was worried, because I couldn't believe he would go that far. Then I remembered the man he had become during the divorce. Or perhaps the man he had always been. Maybe I was finally seeing him clearly. Margaret was ready. We had years of evidence. Text messages, emails, photographs, social media posts, witnesses, even messages Ethan had sent friends, praising me as a supportive wife. One message had been written barely 2 months before he filed for divorce. Another problem for Ethan was our home security system. Several recordings existed, including footage from a year earlier, showing him throwing a decorative vase during an argument. It shattered against a wall. I remember being terrified that night. Back then I convinced myself he was just stressed. Now the recording spoke for itself. The hearing regarding his accusations lasted less than an hour. The judge reviewed the evidence, listened to testimony, examined timelines, then dismissed the claims completely. The ruling was devastating for Ethan. But worse than losing was the effect it had on the judge. She was visibly frustrated. By this point she had reviewed months of filings, months of omissions, months of contradictions, months of accusations that repeatedly collapsed under scrutiny. During one hearing, she looked directly at Ethan and spoke with the kind of controlled disappointment that somehow felt harsher than anger. "Mr. Carter, you have concealed assets, failed to provide accurate disclosures, made unsupported allegations, and repeatedly wasted this court's resources." The courtroom became very quiet. I don't think anyone wanted to breathe. The judge continued. "I'm inclined to proceed with immediate dissolution and asset distribution." That was the moment I knew it was over. Not because I had won, because the truth had finally caught up to him. The final settlement was surprisingly straightforward. I retained the house because it had been purchased before the marriage. My retirement accounts largely remained mine, due to premarital contributions. The cryptocurrency was divided fairly, 50-50, exactly as it should have been. His hidden accounts were factored into the calculations, The undisclosed assets became part of the overall division. The result was simple. The more he had tried to hide, the less advantage he gained. In the end, all those schemes accomplished almost nothing, except creating problems for himself. A lot of problems. Government penalties, back taxes, payment plans, investigations, expenses, consequences that would follow him long after our divorce was finalized. The day everything became official, my phone vibrated one last time. A text from Ethan. "I hope you're happy. You destroyed my life over money." I stared at the screen. Then, I typed a response. "You destroyed your life over money." I just kept records. After sending it, I blocked his number. For good. Months passed. Life became quieter, healthier, peaceful in ways I hadn't experienced for years. Then one afternoon I ran into Ethan's cousin, Maya, at a coffee shop. She gave me an update I never asked for. Apparently Ethan had moved back in with his parents. Most of his income was going toward obligations and repayment plans. His professional reputation had taken significant damage. Many former friends had quietly disappeared. The people who once cheered him online were nowhere to be found. Funny how quickly audiences leave when the story changes. His social media accounts became private. The motivational speeches vanished. The confidence vanished too. Richard and Jenna still blamed me. According to Maya, they told anyone willing to listen that I had ruined their son's future out of spite. I wasn't surprised. Accepting reality would require admitting uncomfortable truths, and some people never do. As for Ethan's second lawyer, he actually recovered quite well. Apparently the experience taught him valuable lessons about due diligence and client honesty. Margaret joked that Ethan had accidentally contributed to a young attorney's education. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Then there was Daniel, the co-worker Ethan had obsessed over. The man he insisted was secretly involved with me. The man whose group lunch photos had somehow become evidence of an imaginary affair. For most of my marriage, Daniel had simply been a colleague. Nothing more. After the divorce, however, something changed. Without the constant stress, without the accusations, without the chaos, we started talking more. Then, spending time together, then dating, slowly, carefully. The timing mattered. Because Ethan had always been wrong about one important thing. He sensed an attraction, but he completely misunderstood when it became real. Daniel entered my life after my marriage ended, not before. Today, he's still the first person I call when something good happens, and the first person who reminds me to laugh when life becomes complicated. One evening, after hearing the entire story, he looked at me and said something I'll never forget. "You know, the strange thing is that none of this was actually about money." He was right. The money was never the real issue. Greed was, entitlement was, dishonesty was. The divorce simply exposed what had been hiding underneath for years. As for the cryptocurrency, its value eventually increased again. The investments continued growing. Everything remained properly documented, properly reported, properly taxed, exactly the way it should be. Because the biggest lesson I learned wasn't financial. It was personal. When someone builds their future on deception, eventually, the foundation cracks. Sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once, but it always cracks. Ethan wanted to take everything. Instead, he lost nearly everything that mattered. Not because I orchestrated some elaborate revenge. Not because I was a mastermind. Not because I outsmarted him. He lost because every decision he made pushed him closer to consequences he refused to believe would ever arrive. I simply stopped looking away. I documented. I hired professionals. I told the truth, and when the dust settled, the facts spoke louder than either of us ever could. One final detail still makes me laugh. Remember that missing camera lens? The one Ethan never returned. A few months after the divorce, someone found it listed for sale online. Using his real account, his real name, his real photo, the evidence practically delivered itself. I eventually recovered the value of the lens, plus additional costs. Not a life-changing amount of money, but enough to make a point. After everything that happened, It felt strangely fitting. The man who spent months trying to hide things was ultimately undone by his inability to stop leaving evidence behind.